So, honorable colleagues, distinguished guests, and leaders from across government, civil society, and also friends from the research community, welcome to this very first Planetary Day on the Hill. Before doing anything, before describing you the agenda, I would like very much, and I'm asking a favor of my dear friend Valérie Courtois, to come and do land acknowledgement. Valérie, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la sénatrice. Bonjour tout le monde. Mon nom, c'est Valérie Courtois. Je suis directrice générale de l'initiative de leadership autochtone et je suis membre de la nation Innu, qui est une nation qui occupe la péninsule Québec-Labrador. Et donc, c'est un grand honneur de vous rejoindre aujourd'hui. I would like to acknowledge that we are currently on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, the unceded lands of the Anishinaabe people, also known as the Algonquin. The closest communities, for those who may not know, are Kitigan-Zibi and Pikwanagan here on the Ontario side. And I'd like to recognize the stewardship, care, and love that the Anishinaabe people have shown to this land, which are allowing us to today be able to talk about the importance of stewardship and care and love of the planet. So thank you very much for allowing me a moment to acknowledge that, and I hope you have a wonderful event.
Merci beaucoup, Valérie. Donc, on approche les Jours de la Terre, c'est 22 avril prochain. Et donc, cette rencontre, pour moi, est d'une importance particulière. Aujourd'hui, nous réunissons des parlementaires, des hauts fonctionnaires, des décideurs. Je me permis d'inviter plusieurs ambassadeurs, représentants des sociétés, de différents groupes, pour discuter au sujet d'un thème d'intérêt commun à tous nous, les humains, soit d'harmoniser les politiques, nos économies et les institutions avec les réalités des systèmes naturels qui nous soutiennent. Alors, these are important times. These are times in which we are worried about our future. We are facing multiple crises, as I mentioned, climate change, biodiversity loss, public health pressures, affordability. And our objective is to ground this decision-making that we do at our own scale, at our own pace, and in our own environments, to connect science with policy and finances, and to explore how Canada can build a resilient, well-being economy within the planetary limits. I would also like to take a moment to thank, of course, our co-host and sponsor who make today's discussion possible. Your leadership and commitment to advancing planetary health are essential in bringing together this dialogue across sectors. So I will explain how the program will unfold. So we will begin with a keynote given by a discussion and a panel. And we will conclude with an exchange, a Q&A, where I will welcome questions from you, the audience. And then we will share bread, we will share a light lunch, to continue this conversation. Cette discussion alimentera également les travaux, y compris l'élaboration prochaine d'un document d'orientation et des initiatives connexes visant à traduire les réflexions que l'on fait aujourd'hui, par exemple, à l'intention des décideurs. So let's start. It is my great honor to introduce Dr. Johan Rockström, one of the world's foremost scientists on global sustainability and the relationship between human systems and the Earth's life support system. As director of the Postman Institute for Climate Impact Research and a leading voice in Earth system science, Professor Rockström has fundamentally reshaped how we understand the conditions for human prosperity on a finite planet. He is best known for co-developing the Planetary Boundaries Framework, which defines the safe operating space for humanity across 9 critical Earth systems: This framework has become a cornerstone that governments are more and more interested to know about it. It's also interesting to financial institutions and to international organizations seeking to understand and manage systemic risk in an era of accelerating environmental change. His work has moved the global conversation beyond environmental concerns to a clear recognition that the stability of our economies, our society, our health system depends on the stability of the Earth system themselves. At a time when decision makers are confronted with intersecting crises, Professor Rockström brings some clarity, urgency, and he proposes some solutions. He challenged us to rethink the foundations of infinite growth on a finite planet, to align policy with physical reality, and to recognize that respecting planetary limits is not a constraint on development. No, on the contrary, but is a condition for its success. It is therefore a privilege to welcome him today to deliver his keynote within this day of planetary boundaries and systemic risks, what parliamentarians need to know. Thank you so much. Please welcome Professor Rockström.
Thank you so much, Senator, and this is a great privilege. I will share my screen. I hope this will work on your side and on my side, for that matter. Let's see here. Like that. I hope you see my first slide. And with that, I want to give you a scientific update of why it is exactly as Senator Galvez pointed out, that we now need to redefine human development in the future. We need to redefine what we mean by sustainable development. We now need to define this scientifically as prosperity and equity for all citizens in the world within the safe operating space of a stable and resilient planet. We've come to this point where we are unfortunately sitting on overwhelming scientific evidence that we are at risk of destabilizing the very life support systems for humanity, irrespective of where you live on planet Earth. I would argue that the most important scientific graph we have to deal with right as we speak in this time step is on the screen right now. This is the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, scenarios that can still hold the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit that we have signed on in the legally binding Paris Agreement. Now, unfortunately, science must shut the door of all the scenarios that can limit warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius with no or very limited overshoot and bring us way back under 1.5 by the end of this century. The best that science can offer today are the magenta lines you see here. These are the very optimistic scenarios that can still bring us back within the safe planetary boundary of 1.5 degrees Celsius, which has strong scientific support, and I'll come back to that. But we unfortunately cannot avoid, it's inevitable now, that we'll be moving into overshoot. And that at best, we can peak warming at 1.7 degrees Celsius before coming back. Now, the topic of this update I'm giving you is how can we come back? Well, the first conclusion, though, is that inevitably overshoot means we will get more occurrences like this. The massive extreme events of fires, droughts, floods, heat waves, human-reinformed storms, can we say scientifically today will increase in frequency and magnitude almost with zero uncertainty. 2025 and 2024 in particular, when we exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius as a one-year occurrence, cost the global economy, as several of you certainly are well aware of, over $200 billion and massive suffering across the entire world. But the topic of my update here is not this. My topic of this update is here. It is about the stability of the planet. As the astronauts who circled the moon last week in the Artemis 2 once again reminded us that when you see the beauty of the planet from space, you really reconfigure your entire relationship with the planet. You recognize that this beautiful little small blue marble in this dark, vast universe is unique. And I will now share with you the data showing that not only is she unique, we're actually at risk of undermining the stability of the system. But she has biogeophysically remarkable features that have been protecting us during the entire journey of the Industrial Revolution, which we started in the mid-18th century. And here is the most important data, in my view, summarizing the strength of the planet to buffer the unsustainable pressures that we're posing on the planet. The number one is what you see here to the left, which is the update on the where does the heat go from our fossil fuel burning, our greenhouse gas emissions, and our degradation of nature that has caused the climate crisis that we are in the midst of right as we speak, where we are inevitably going to crash through the 1.5 degrees Celsius boundary within the next 3 to 5 years. But the heat that is causing this is only 1% of all the heat injected into the Earth system caused from our unsustainable pressures. 90% is in the ocean. The ocean is a massive dampening and cooling factor on the planet. 5% is used to heat up land. 4%, can you imagine, 4% is consumed in the process of melting ice, which, as you know, living in Canada, I myself come from the Nordic region in Sweden, how rapid ice is melting, glaciers and mountain areas, how snow conditions are shifting, the accelerated rate of melting of the Greenland ice sheet, the West Antarctic ice sheet, that consumes energy. It's only 1% that has caused the warming that we're measuring so far in terms of global mean surface temperature rise. That is a resilience factor of the planet, shoving heat to 99% of the heat under the carpet and so to say, loading it in. It may be released sometime in the future, but so far it's remarkably stable. On the right-hand side, you see the second side of this resilience service to humanity. From 1850 until today on the x-axis, on the y-axis, you have billion tons of carbon, which is the emissions above the zero line here. The red part is fossil fuel burning. The orange part is deforestation. Is it the entire cumulative area under this curve that has caused the climate crisis, the heat injection that we've seen so far? The answer is no. You see the green parts here is the 25% of carbon uptake in the ocean. Another 25% is taken up from intact nature, not agriculture, not managed land, but from intact nature on land. And it's only the blue residual that has remained in the atmosphere, causing the climate crisis and the massive heat imbalance that we're talking about. And you can look at the graph. 150 years of unsustainable pressures causing an exponential rise of increased heat stress to the planet, and the planet just every year helps us more and more. It is correct that the data shows that roughly 50% is removed year by year. There are concerns now that the carbon uptake on land, the lighter green wedge there, is starting to show signs of instability, but overall the planet is still remarkably strong despite this unsustainable pressures. But we have reasons for concern. Here you have the temperature curve to the left, measured from 5 independent sources. You see how we touch 1.5 degrees Celsius in 2024. On the right-hand side, you see sea surface temperatures also rising fast, much faster than predicted. And this is what makes us nervous. Since 1970 up until 2014, the temperatures rise linearly at a very rapid pace of 0.18, almost 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade. It's a kind of a rule of thumb which guides most climate models. It guides climate sensitivity to the famous holy grail in climate science of how much warming can we expect at a doubling of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That number lands in most mainstream science at 3 degrees Celsius at a doubling. Well, we are unfortunately seeing now statistically verified, as you see here, over the last decade, the rate of warming is accelerating. The rate of warming has increased by 50% and reaches almost 0.3 degrees Celsius per decade. And we are getting increasingly nervous that one explanation to this is definitely that we are changing the composition of air pollutants in the atmosphere. We can come back to that in a discussion. But the second part may actually be that the planet is starting to show its first signs of losing resilience. And this is one part of the evidence why we need to define scientifically a safe operating space on Earth. The second piece of evidence we need, why we need to now have a safe operating space on Earth, is that we today understand that our planet is not only a remarkably resilient, self-regulating biogeophysical system, we also know that the Holocene, the geological epoch that we've been residing in, that the planet has been remarkably stably sitting in since we left the last ice age some 12,000 years ago, is our corridor of life. It's a remarkable stable state, and we have the evidence for this. And here you have it. What you see here on the x-axis is the last 12,000 years. So basically the entire warm interglacial period since we left the last ice age. On the y-axis, again, you have global mean surface temperature. The 0 point here is 14 degrees Celsius, the average temperature on Earth before we start burning fossil fuels. And just look at the stability. This is what I today call the corridor of life. It's a 14 degrees Celsius planet with a maximum variability of plus minus 1 degree Celsius. 1 degree Celsius is the warmest temperature when added and the coldest when deducting. Everything we've seen over the past 12,000 years has occurred within this variability. The Little Ice Age, the medieval warm period, all the regional shifts in the Sahara Desert from savanna to desert, it has occurred. There's natural variability for sure, but it's within this narrow range. We then kick ourselves off and you see the spike, and it's taking us on a journey that if we continue burning fossil fuels as today, would bring us to 3.1 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. That is winding back the climate clock, 3 million years. That's how far back you have to go to find a similar level of heat on the planet. So the Holocene is the reference point for the planet we depend on. If we want to become stewards of the planet and take responsibility for our and future generations, we want to come back as close as possible to the Holocene corridor of life. Piece of evidence number 2. Final piece of evidence is tipping points. Tipping points are hardwired. This is the understanding today that our planet is self-regulating, is resilient, thanks to tipping element systems, the large ice sheets, the overturning of heat in the North Atlantic, the Amazon basin, large biophysical systems that not only contribute to cool the planet and to regulate, therefore, the stability of the entire climate system, they have multiple stable states. Push them too far, they cross a threshold, and they will shift their feedbacks from cooling and dampening, what we call negative feedbacks, to amplifying and warming, which we call positive feedbacks. And here you have the 16 tipping element systems that have now been scientifically verified. They are in the IPCC, and we have now updated this list. 6 of them are in the Arctic region. So I call this the ground zero. Canada, the Nordics, and Russia are part of this part of the planet. The AMOC is a connector through the Amazon basin. 3 of them are down in Antarctica, West Antarctic ice sheet being one that we're really seriously worried about. The low latitude coral reef systems, livelihoods of over 400 million people at risk already when we speak today. And here is the data. The 16 tipping point systems, and you see the burning embers width here is the uncertainty range in science. On the x-axis, you have temperature estimates of when these systems are likely to cross their tipping points. Now, admittedly, number one, the science has uncertainties. We cannot give precise points when these systems tip, but we know they can tip. We know that if they tip, it's basically irreversible. We know that it will change the climate system, and we also know it will impact life support for millions of people across the world. The points you see here are the median estimates in these uncertainty ranges. And look at the top 6 of them. They have an average estimate, a likely tipping point temperature at roughly 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this is the kind of scientific evidence we use to set the safe boundaries. You don't want to exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius and enter a risk of irreversibly melting the Greenland ice sheet, the West Antarctic ice sheet, collapse of the tropical coral reef systems, abrupt thawing of permafrost, collapse of the Labrador Sea Current, collapse of the Barents Sea ice. Those are top candidates at low levels of temperature. But you see the two ones in yellow here with very wide uncertainty ranges, with very high estimates of temperature risks, the Atlantic current collapse, the AMOC, and the Amazon rainforest. And I'll just give you one example. I actually mentioned both of them, how we have underestimated the risk. And let's look first at the Amazon basin. So climate science says that the risk of a tipping point in the tropical Amazon basin, planet Earth's richest biome on land, is only at risk at roughly 3 to 5 degrees Celsius of warming. So essentially a low risk, because we're not suggesting that we would hit that, perhaps hopefully never hit those kind of temperatures. But what you see on this slide is deforestation. The yellow parts here is what we've lost over the past 100 years. It's roughly 17% of the forest cover. And if you factor in the fact that we are losing biodiversity, we're losing forest cover, we're changing hydrology, the latest science then shows that the risk of a tipping point is not at 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, because we're breaching so many boundaries at the same time, biodiversity, freshwater, land cover, and climate, that if we lose more than 20 to 25% of the forest cover, we are likely to tip over already somewhere between 1 and 2 degrees Celsius of warming. So here you have a proof that we need a planetary stewardship approach for our own stability in society. Let's take the AMOC. Well, the AMOC has, up until the IPCC 6 assessment, been assessed as a low likelihood event of shutdown. You have the AMOC, it's one of the 3 thermohaline pumps that regulates the ocean conveyor belt, which thereby basically regulates the heat transfer and storage of heat in the ocean. It is determining the flux of nutrients in the ocean and thereby feeding all the phyto and animal plankton and all the fish habitats in the ocean. The AMOC has a switch. We know this. It's been going on and off at least 6 to 8 times over the past 100,000 years. We also know physically why it happens. It is the red flux you see here is saline, high density, heavy, warm surface water flowing up north via the Gulf Stream, reaching the southern tip of Greenland, releasing heat to the atmosphere, making it much pleasant to live over winter in the Nordic region, more challenging for you guys in Canada. So we get the heat flux from the natural AMOC circulation. This heavy water, this heavy saline water then sinks and it drives the whole pump. But when the Greenland ice sheet and the Arctic melts and flow of fresh water dilutes the saline water, the water gets less heavy and sinks slower and the whole system slows down. So far, the famous cold blob, if you look at to the right-hand corner here, is a proof that the AMOC is slowing down. It has estimated to slow down with 15% so far. The latest modeling work shows that to the left here, that if it would shut down, it would lead to an abrupt cooling in the northern hemisphere. You see that in blue, and in red, it would lead to an overall net warming of the planet. It would have impacts across the entire world. And the latest science shows that this is not a low likelihood event anymore, that if you quantify it, we have a probability of severe slowdown this century. So basically in the coming 75 years of up to 1 to 10% likelihood, which is a very high probability for an unacceptable impact. So there we are. And it's starting to cost the economy. As I mentioned earlier, extreme events are hitting hard across the entire world. The latest climate economics analysis shows that already when we pass 2 degrees Celsius that you showed to the left here, we're starting to have double-digit impacts on global GDP. The latest paper on this that came out just last month from Marshall Burke and colleagues at Stanford shows that by 2050, we're talking about 10 to 20% decline in income levels if we continue business as usual pathways as today. And look at the long-term impact. We're talking a 50% decline of economic growth compared to business as usual. So very significant and unacceptable impacts. So that's why we need a planetary boundary framework, that the Anthropocene and the pressures are real. The Holocene is our reference point. Tipping points need to be taken seriously. We've been mapping these Earth system processes that regulate the stability of the planet for the past 15 years. You have them here, 9 systems. We can now quantify a safe operating space that gives us a high chance of keeping the planet within a Holocene-like state that can support humanity. 7 of the 9 boundaries have been breached. That is what you see here in the 2025 assessment. So we don't only have a climate crisis on our watch, which is the top wedge here you see at the midnight point, but to the left you have the nature boundaries, biodiversity, land system change. That's the cover of forest systems, the freshwater cycle, overconsumption of blue and green water, and overloading of reactive nitrogen and phosphorus in the biogeochemical flows. We've just breached the boundary on the ocean, and look at novel entities, which is loading of microplastics, all forms of persistent organic pollutants. We're basically taking big risks of undermining the resilience of the system. The 9 systems, we today conclude that if we can be stewards of these 9, we have a good chance of keeping the planet in a stable state. But 4 of them are in the red, 3 are in the yellow. Yellow means we're in the uncertainty range of science, which means that things can go wrong, but we today are still in the uncertainty range. We get so nervous about these results that we have actually started now to update the science every year. We do this in the so-called planetary health check. This is the 2025 health check. It's only the 2nd time we've done it. We release it at the New York Climate Week each year. We've used the analogy to try to communicate more widely that we take the planet with all its interconnected organs for a health scan each year. And we bring Mother Earth to the doctor, and here you have the blood sample tests confirming that 7 of the 9 are outside of the safe green space. Again, several of them are in the yellow uncertainty range, but a few are moving, unfortunately, into the red zone. When we summarize all this, our conclusion is that we have a problem, a planetary crisis on our watch. We're outside of the safe space. But as a closure, we assess that we're not yet in the red zone. We have not yet pushed the planet irreversibly away from stability and life support capability, but the window is rapidly shutting. It's narrowly there, but Mother Earth, with its biogeophysical resilience, is still dominated by dampening, cooling feedbacks, but we're seeing the first signs of serious risks of losing this capacity. So we're truly at this decisive point of transition. I could then, of course, spend a lot of time showing that the global energy transition, the global food system transition, the 2 biggest levers we need to pull urgently to bring us back within a safe operating space, interestingly, has scalable solutions today. They tend to, in many cases, not only be competitive even without subsidies, but particularly give more security, more stability, more health, and better socioeconomic development for those economies that adopt sustainable transformation solutions. But we're also facing headwinds in a geopolitical world that has started to show signs of backtracking, which is very worrying at a time when we have to accelerate the pathway. And the leadership from countries like Canada is absolutely fundamental at this critical juncture for humanity's future on Earth. So with that, handing back to you and looking forward to the panel. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Rockström. You know, I'm a little bit scared, and but you know, I have 3 children, and when my children were touching hot things, they immediately jump. And here it looks like we are the frog in the pan, getting hotter and hotter, and we are not moving. But our intuition, our desire for survival should push us to do and to act. And I hear you talking about how Canada, we are close to the Arctic and we have the boreal forest. And I have my friends from Latin America which share the responsibility of the other common wood, which is the Amazon. And so one burning question that I have for you, so very thinking in what can I do here in Canada, what my fellow colleagues, decision makers can do. If Canada were to align its economic and fiscal policy with the planetary boundaries framework that you have eloquently described, and that we need to start doing it today, if not tomorrow, what are the two most critical decisions, whether in budgeting, financial regulation, or industrial policy, that Parliament must take within the next years to reduce this systemic risk and strengthen long-term prosperity? Thank you so much in advance.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's a very, very important question, and I think the first decision, which indeed is a challenging one, but I think every nation in the world needs to start quantifying, translating the scientific definition of planetary boundaries into national boundaries, just as Canada has done already for the 1.5 degrees Celsius boundary on climate, but to do the same thing for fresh water, nitrogen, phosphorus, land, biodiversity, and quantify the boundary, an absolute boundary, and translate that to a budget, which then becomes the share of the boundary that Canada needs to operate within. We have companies trying to do this. You have cities around the world trying to do this. New Zealand tried to actually, through the leadership of Jacinda Ardern, to downscale the planetary boundaries to the national level. And we're quite excited scientifically of providing tools to be able to downscale boundaries to the national level. So that would be one. Secondly, of course, I think continuing Canada's pathway on aligning the climate mitigation pathway with science, and really move towards a zero emissions economy somewhere between 2040 and 2050, I think would be a really important contribution from countries like Canada. And then finally, I would say that I'm not sure how far you've come here, but I think in general, one of the biggest tasks we have is to start documenting evidence of how sustainable decisions give better outcomes for the economy. We tend to still report sustainability as a kind of a side reporting scheme on environmental indicators, which is good and important, but we're not connecting it well enough. What does more more circular economic products and moving within the constraints of scientifically defined budgets for natural capital, what are the benefits that we can make out of that for the economy? And we know that there are many of these, and I think countries like Canada could be really spearheading the pathway in that direction.
Thank you so much. So continuing with our program, we will now pass to the panel. So I want to introduce our moderator, Dr. Courtney Howard, an emergency physician in Canada's subarctic in Yellowknife. Actually, I met her there in Yellowknife. Clinical associate professor at the University of Calgary and a leading voice in planetary health. She is founder of POWER, president of the Northwest Territories Medical Association, and chair of the Global Climate and Health Alliance. So she will moderate the next part of our meeting, which is the panel. Thank you, Courtney.
Hi, thanks everyone. Thanks, Rosa. Thanks, Dr. Rockström. So when I go to work as an emergency physician, I concern myself mostly with the complex adaptive system we all walk around in every day. So we know that in order for it to work, the heart needs to be working, the lungs need to be working, the kidneys need to be working. And sometimes I go into my shift and someone says, Dr. Howard, there's a semi-stable patient in the trauma room. We need you there right away. And what that means is that their vital signs are nearing the end of the buffering range, not unlike what Dr. Rockström was talking about here. That is the first patient you see, and you know that tempo matters. In cardiopulmonary resuscitation, we say push hard, push fast, don't stop. And that's what saves lives. So that's what we're called to do right now. When we speak with decision makers, we have an economist here in the front row, we recognize that the thing you have your eye on is a different complex adaptive system. That's the economy. You've got your eye on different indicators as well. And so what I'd like to invite us all to do is to start to work by the same set of indicators, because I think that will help us all get into the same room and start working on the same job. And as we do that, I also think it's important to realize that the economy, our health, and health systems all depend on the planet. So the planet is the boss. This was unfortunately driven extremely home to us very clearly in the north in 2023 when extreme wildfires forced the emergent evacuation of the 100-bed subarctic hospital where I work. There is only one CT scanner in the entire Northwest Territories. We serve an area that comprises 30 majority Indigenous communities, an area larger than France and Spain combined. When we evacuated that hospital, we didn't have a plan because we didn't think it could happen to us. We always thought we had enough rock and giant lakes around us to protect us, but we didn't take 21st century fire into account. That means that our 100-bed hospital inpatients were taken all the way down to Vancouver by military evacuation plane. Now, we know that national security is on the agenda. We know that Arctic sovereignty is on the agenda. That's the same CT scanner our troops need in the Arctic if they are to be there to protect us, okay? So what I'm saying is that these are intertwined issues. Security in one area will protect us in more. And so in order for us to help draw these threads together, I'm going to bring two of the smartest women that I know who are sitting here in a room of a lot of really brilliant women and men and people of gender diverse perspectives. And so first I'm going to ask Dr. Nicole Redvers. She is a naturopathic doctor and researcher. She's a member of the Dene-Nikwe First Nation. We're really proud of her in the North. She was, when I moved to Yellowknife, a clinician who was very beloved by patients, and since then she has done her master's degree. She has a PhD from Oxford University in planetary health and sustainable healthcare from an Indigenous perspective. She's the head of Working Group 2, the Health and Wellbeing section for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and is a member of many WHO commissions. And I have learned a lot from her. I have an actual Nicole Redvers voice in my head that talks at me, and so we're here to help you also have a Nicole Redvers voice in your head. I'd also like to invite Dr. Victoria Hurth. Sometimes people speak and you just listen to what they have to say. Dr. Hurth is another person whose voice is starting to appear more frequently in my head, so thank you, Dr. Hurth. She is an independent academic and one of the world's top experts at the intersection of business, purpose, and well-being. Many of you may have heard her speak at the Victoria Forum. She has just published a book called Beyond Profit, Leadership for a Wellbeing Economy. So I think I will join you maybe there. Does that... Maybe I'll do it from here, actually. Okay, so my first question is for Dr. Victoria Hurth. So you are helping to design a new international standard for purpose-driven governance. And I'm curious about how you feel Canada can use the work you've done at governance at all levels to start to reconcile all of these different priorities that we've got and move us all into the same frame.
Thanks, Courtney. And I realize I have 3 minutes for this, so I'll do my very best. Okay. So basically, we have a crisis of decision-making, which means we have a crisis of governance, because it's governance that frames decision-making. It is the hidden power in all rooms, time immemorial. And we have to get some things straight before we can move on. around this. So firstly, remembering that governments are purpose-driven. They are in service to collective long-term well-being. The International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board definitively says all governments exist to enhance the well-being of citizens and other relevant entities. The economy is a tool of government to do this. So the economy exists, and we buy into the economy because we believe it is the best way. We design it so that it can be the best way to transform the resources that we have access to in order to optimize our well-being. We can call it flourishing, development, prosperity, whatever we like, but this is ultimately what we're buying into. The problem comes that the government is not being governed, I mean governments everywhere, to be purpose-driven, and are not therefore governing what would be well-being economies that exist to drive and not harm collective long-term well-being. So why not, and how can we understand how we're in this mess? Well, it comes down to the fact that we've been governing for money and financial income instead, in the hope that this will equal well-being. In other words, we believe that money is such a good proxy for well-being that we don't need to govern otherwise. Instead, what we say is the best way to achieve well-being is to make decisions that optimize short-term financial self-interest as long as we have enough resources, and by resources we mean stocks and flows of financial capital, which means that the innovative goal of well-being is actually not allowed, because that would contravene the market, free market economy, and the non-financial capitals, stakeholders, and social and environmental systems, of which the planetary boundaries are the environmental systems, are not costed, not valued, and essentially been asset stripped. You supercharge an economy for 100 years to the size and speed that we have now, under that governance system for decision making, then it is no surprise that we are going over the cliff. But the problem is that all we've been doing is working within the system to try to clear up the mess and tweak it and push the box of governance from within. But what we really need to do is recognize that we need to redesign the box. And by box, I mean the governance frame within which we operate, because that dictates the strategies and the ideas that get the thumbs up or get the thumbs down. I'll say more in the next question about that. But just to say that countries around the world have been starting to recognize this and say, why are we going via finance to get to well-being? We should be focusing our innovative efforts and those of all the organizations in our country that are our innovation nerve center to drive and not harm well-being. And therefore, we need to start doing things differently. Now, it's been a slow and fragmented journey. In our book, we have lots of examples of countries around the world, including the steps that Canada's been taking. And I noticed for the last 20 years that Quebec has been doing amazing work on collective well-being. And of course, you have a wealth of Indigenous governance understanding and knowledge to draw from as well. But really, if we're looking at concrete steps, we really have to start with governance, which means starting with the core questions about, in the Constitution, what do you exist to maximize as a country, and within what boundaries? What value do you want to protect in the process? The ISO in purpose-driven organizations will give that blueprint to say how we make sure we govern to drive and not harm collective well-being. And Wales is the best example at the moment for putting that directly into the heart of the Constitution to remember why governments exist in the first place and deliver on that in a governance system.
Thanks so much, Dr. Hurth. So you referenced Indigenous governance systems in your answer, and so I have spent the last 15 years living in a majority Indigenous part of the world, and I've certainly learned as much from elders, from people like Dr. Redvers, as I have from colleagues at the Lancet and other Western science bastions. Dr. Redvers, can you tell us what aspects of Indigenous ways of knowing and governance you think could be extremely helpful to us as we move into a new era of governance in Canada?
Masicho, thanks for that. I was envisioning how if somebody was making cookies over many decades and you keep adding less and less eggs and baking powder over those years, what will happen to your cookies? Because the reality is you know, we still get somewhat of a cookie happening, but it's becoming more crumbly as we're going along, and we're just hoping the cookie's just going to stay together so that we can still eat it next time that we do. So, in terms of the context of Indigenous peoples and their knowledges, and we've seen increased interest, of course, not only across organizations like the IPCC with diverse knowledges, but also the direct applicability of our governance structures that take into account the fact that each and every one of us here are made up of about 60 to 70% water, which means you're sitting here as the rivers and lakes of where you come from. You are sitting here as a river, as a lake of where you come from. So that interconnected nature that we have to our land bases is not just a symbolic or a metaphoric analogy, it's a physiological reality that we are absolutely in and of itself nature. Yet as part of the policies that defined us, our governance and decision-making, as you've noted, the environment has been excluded as a key part, whereas when I sit with elders and we make decisions, Mother Earth in ceremony is always the first thing because there's a clear acknowledgement that that is an absolute necessity for everything else to occur. So folks have heard of seven-generation thinking, taking into account decision-making from our experience in the past, the lessons learned to make decisions today, to take into account the effects for the next seven generations has not been the Constitution of Canada since it's formed, yet has been the reality of these lands that we come from, the lands that have been stewarded for thousands of years. We know Indigenous peoples host the most biodiverse regions on the planet. Their lands contain more carbon than any other lands. We know that they retain the majority of the world's biodiversity, 1/3 of the world's old-growth forests. Yet at the same time, these governance models have been continually suppressed through mandated in this country by the Indian Act and other formalities with a lack of treaty recognition that has allowed lands to continue to be purviewed by colonial ways of knowing, and we see the consequences today in regards to that. So for us, it's very simple in terms of that. How do we be able to remember that we are rivers and lakes around us, not as symbolic or metaphoric analogies, but as physiological realities of Canadians? We are in and of itself the lands that surround us, and if we continue to forget that, we're going to continue business as usual, and we're going to pay for it.
Something I'm struck by when I speak with elders is how, when you start to look at the whole world, including the Earth, as a complex adaptive system that needs to be well, that includes us. So I've actually had more explicit support from some of the elders in the North of my own well-being, invitations to join as a community in well-being after the evacuation. Things like fire feeding ceremonies, drum dances, really brought us together as a community to start to heal. And I think inviting us all, there's sometimes, I think people feel like they have to work as hard as they possibly can when things are so bad. And instead, realizing that we need to steward ourselves and protect our own well-being in order to be able to contribute as well as we possibly can to the collective is actually something I've also taken from Indigenous communities. So we've heard some solutions, and Dr. Rockström already gave us some of his top bullet points for Canada. I'm really curious from all of you. So we're talking about pulling the threads of all of these different systems into one conversation. There's different techniques that we've seen around the world to help us do that. So one of them is comprehensive wealth accounting. You referenced that. So instead of just keeping track of financial capital, also keeping track of ecological wealth, social cohesion, and human capability, and guarding the stocks and flows of those and making sure that we're keeping track of them the same way we keep track of money. We've seen efforts to create things like our wonderful quality of life framework. So we have had incredible work actually done by the Department of Finance and Statistics Canada to create a set of indicators that John Emmanuel Deneuve, who leads the Oxford Centre on Policy, actually told me he thinks is the best one in the whole world. It's already being used in our budgeting framework. There are committees for the future. There's a Future Generations Act. So Dr. Rockström, you talk to people all around the world. I'm curious, of all of these solutions that you're seeing, Malaysia's National Planetary Health Action Plan, what would you love to see Canada take on? We've just had a consequential by-election, which means we know that we have the federal government that we have for the next 3 years. What type of leadership would you like to see from Canada at this moment in time?
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. And well, to be honest, I think it's so inspiring to listen to Victoria and Nicole here that coming at this from a planetary scale, the challenge as I see it is that if we're able to reconnect our governance to what indigenous communities have been representing for generations and generations to really be embedded within the natural capital that is foundational for all life support. How do we scale that up to become mainstream governance as part of finance and economics and security and the policies at a national level, and how to get that then to spill over from a national level to the international community? And that, as I see it, is the big challenge today, because things, as you pointed out yourself, we're running out of time. It's also a question of speed. It's speed and scale. So perhaps my only, I know perhaps it's not so very helpful, but I think the voice of Canada is also needed in the world, that exactly what you're expressing here. And I'm saying this actually not at all to be polite or nice in any way, but as you know, looking at this from a European perspective, you know, your Prime Minister, Mark Carney, is one of those few leaders who really are standing by some fundamental core principles of dignity, of collective action, and of trust and transparency. And I think that is what the world needs more than ever now. And I come back to my previous point, that how to then express that in an evidence-based way? Well, I think it is about getting the tools in place where you start accounting and putting value on nature into your financial accounting, to really bring in the planetary boundaries into your financial and kind of the hard parts of governance, and prove to the world that it makes sense, that you're actually moving into the future, into a more modern, secure, healthy, and attractive future. I mean, that I think is the kind of elements required. But to close, also to say that I am absolutely sure, as I'm sure we all agree, Canada cannot do it alone. Germany cannot do it alone. The Nordics cannot do it alone. We have to have alliances of the willing to work together today. And we know that those alliances exist. You have strong nations that are really willing to lead the way. But I think there's a need for stronger partnerships between the alliances of the willing today, because we see that the global climate negotiations, the World Trade Organization, IMF, the World Bank, they get stalled when we rely too much on consensus decisions, because we are unfortunately not able to agree across all aisles in the world today. So again, that leadership, I think, is also something that I think Canada has a very special position to provide.
Thank you very much. And same question to you, Dr. Redvers.
Yeah, I was just thinking about your words and the planetary boundaries concept. If we bring it back to a socioeconomic and a health lens, part of what we don't see in the presentation so far is that when we see those tipping points going to certain stages, what does that actually mean in the sense of increased conflict in the world, for example, because of increasing droughts? What does that tell us in terms of the health costs from sea level incursion, increasing saltwater levels within areas, causing health effects? At what point in those tipping points do we see the heat-related events causing excess deaths? So we need to remember that, yes, these planetary boundaries exist, but we need to align them with the social, economic, and the health consequences, which are just being mapped out now. Because at varying degrees of those tipping points, there's different consequences, not only for the economy, but how that actually plays into non-economic loss and damage, which is the health implications. But the degree to those will depend on where those tipping points line and how the intersections between those planetary boundaries occur. Because if nitrogen and phosphate is increasing algae blooms or things within lakes at the same time as heat rise, that creates different consequences comparatively to heat rise and novel chemicals within an environment that's being polluted by other sorts of things. So these system-based approaches are incredibly important to understand the complexity of it, but they don't exist in a vacuum. They have differential consequences depending on the nature of the planetary boundaries and how they exist, and the tipping points that exist as well too. So in thinking about answer to that, we have absolutely no investment in Canada in research research dollars around planetary health. Our research systems exist in vacuums. We have health with CIHR, and then we have the environment when it comes to NSERC. So to be able to actually have portfolios of research that cross boundaries, that could actually examine these questions, they do not exist in Canada right now. So because of that, we're scientifically behind comparatively to many of the other G7 countries in our knowledge base of how to be able to codify what Dr. Rockström was talking about in downscaling the impacts of some of these climate events to our local national context. And that requires some fundamental rethinking about how research dollars are allocated, how can we actually support the scientific needs that we have in the country, and those are impactable decisions that could be very realistic and low-hanging fruit in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Hurth?
Yes, so I'd like to directly address what you talked about there, Johan, in regards to how do we create a codified way of governing ourselves so that we don't go over the cliff, that is replicable, scalable, and can unite us all in what is our common shared agenda. And for that, I need to pause a little bit on ISO 3711 in purpose-driven organizations, because this is the blueprint for that decision-making. It builds on the world's first consensus view on governance of organizations that was produced 5 years ago. I led that process. It took 5 years. Before that, our understanding of governance that wasn't co-opted by short-term financial self-interest didn't exist. We didn't have a way of talking about it. Now, ISO 3711 can ask and answer humanity's ultimate question, because that is not a product or a service. That's not the solution. The solution can only be a way of governing our routine decisions so that we drive and don't harm our collective well-being. Within that frame, of course, then, we get to make decisions and put the right problem at the center of the room. The reason why we're going, why is this not happening? Why is that not happening? Is because it isn't the problem at the center of the room, and it's irrational to make choices for sustainability at the moment. And we need to flip that on its head. And it's this standard that, once signed off, will be signed off by 174 countries. It is political but not political. It's based on the 174 national standards bodies around the world. And Canada has been instrumental in both 37,000 in governance and in this purpose-driven governance standard. There's a public consultation coming out in October, which all countries in the world can get involved with to raise the heat on this discussion. And I really encourage all of you to get behind that and use that opportunity. Because what we need to understand, and I will just very briefly summarize, that governance is 3 key things. It is direction, oversight of that direction, and accountability for that direction. So we oversee and account for the direction. Accountability cannot exist unless we're clear what we are directing for. And direction gets to the heart of decision-making. It is 2 things. What are we maximizing for? What is the value that we intend to exist for? What are we trying to do? And within what boundaries do we want to operate? What parameters for decision-making? Everything you were talking about, Johan, regarding how do we codify that into budgets that are decision-making behaviors that we then oversee and account for. And so ultimately, at the moment, that governance box is framed by money as the goal and money as the means to the goal. But money is only symbolic. Its own never is an end goal. And so this standard will help us to put into very precise terms the governance behaviors that we need in terms of direction, oversight, and accountability, that is a world consensus platform for credibility to test and learn and work out, does it have the best of the indigenous wisdom in it? Does it have the best of what's happening in Quebec? We can test it, learn it, own it in a way that it isn't the UN, it isn't a company, it is owned globally. So that would be my message to you, that I think we're on the cusp, Johan, of having the ability to encode not just what we don't want to harm, but what we actually want to create with our innovative businesses, and not just businesses, charities, community groups. We need one governance frame for all organizations that unleashes and takes away the red tape, which, by the way, is going to get far, far worse as we keep trying to plug the holes of a broken system. We have to call time on the system, and we need to create the new governance frame, and we can do it.
Thank you so much, all of you. So when you think about it, it was interesting for me to learn the historical reasons for this. We ended up governing for money because we didn't have the tools to measure well-being. These were decisions made by economists in late 1700s, 1800s. We have better tools now. We have incredible scientists in the room. We know that we can start to actually model to maximize for long-term well-being for all. And we've already got a quality of life framework that clearly puts life satisfaction at the top. So how can we use the best of innovative minds in Canada, our statisticians, our very strong budgeting frameworks, to look at ecological wealth, social cohesion, human adaptability, and financial capital as the means to make things happen, and get ourselves all into the same room to make sure that we optimize for what we really want rather than throwing resources at an outcome that only has some meaning. In high-income countries, increasing GDP hasn't really been shown to increase life satisfaction, not strongly anyhow. It's different in lower and middle-income countries. So it's an exciting time to be alive, really. We're at the cusp of negative tipping points. We're also at the cusp of positive tipping points in renewable energy, in sustainable healthcare. We know what we need to do. We have the innovative ability to do it. Canada has the most educated population in the entire world. I believe we can lead this. And so we're now going to move into question and answer, and we look forward to the questions you have for our panel.
What an incredible conversation and so interesting subjects. I'm sure you have questions. So, okay, Catherine McKenna.
Hello, Dr. Rockström.
You want to ask a question?
It's Catherine McKenna. It's great to be here, and you're all brilliant. And I look around the room, and I don't see a lot of politicians. I see senators, but I'm not sure. Is there an MP in this room? There's not one MP in this room. And the reality is, while Canada, it does a lot of things really well on climate, we have, like everywhere else, we've really backtracked. And that's every single province, including Quebec. And it seems to be obviously there's a lot going on with the United States in particular, but we are a petro-state. I didn't think this when I was minister. I thought, we were moving forward and we could all work together, but we're really challenged here. And so I think when I think about planetary boundaries, it's actually what people care about. But the challenge, I think, is convincing Canadians that they care about it so they can that they understand it better, what it means for them. And I think, Dr. Redvers, what you said was really important. I mean, what all of you said is incredible, but translating these planetary boundaries, like, what does it mean? What are we losing? Because people care about fresh water. Like, they care about all these things that are really important, but I think it seems so abstract. And as a result, when it's abstract, politicians think people don't care. So, like, people, they'll poll and they'll be like, would you like a job, or would you like to do work on climate? Or they don't know what planetary boundaries are if you ask Canadians, but they would say, we want a job. And so I'm wondering, is there a way to translate two things? One, the impact that we're seeing. So actually show in a country, in Canada, what does it mean to lose fresh water? What does it mean, for the Arctic? What does it mean to actual provinces? So premiers actually have to pay attention in terms of risks. And then the flip side, and I know, Dr. Rockström, you're working on this, but I think it's really important to talk about the solutions. And what do those solutions mean in terms of what would a better life look like for everyone? But real things. Like, we're going to have less people dying of, air pollution. Really talking about that, because I think if we could do this in a way that it's not up here, we have to do the science so that you can bring it down here, but the way Indigenous peoples talk is like way real people live. And so I'm hoping there's some way, as we take this on, that it's not just some high-level thing. And by the way, I have, my views about whether I think governments or the Bank of Canada or others will actually take on some systemic, change and actually approach things in a much more rational way. But I'm wondering, is there a way to make it real so that you actually show the planetary boundaries, but you show what that would mean? And then you break it down by province, like, what would it mean for you? And also, here's the other side. Here are the amazing things that it would mean. And this is how jobs, but also, better health. So I don't know if that's possible. And Dr. Rockström, maybe someone is doing this. Some country is doing to translate into real life things for real life people.
Yes. So first, Johan, Dr. Rockström, could you start the answer?
Yeah, thanks, and great to see you, Catherine, and as always, really insightful. And well, the answer is yes to start with. There is increasing, really, down to the local level mapping of impacts on humans, on communities, on societies, admittedly still basically boundary by boundary, so we're not very good at looking at how boundaries interact, which they do, because the terrifying fires that you were subject to in British Columbia were a result of water scarcity and drying forest and temperature rise, which then ignited terrifying fires that had massive impacts on suffering for large communities. So mapping this is increasingly not only done, but can be done, and we are actually working on an effort of creating what we call a mission control center, where we not only map the planetary boundaries, but also translate them to high resolution maps on impacts, on basically coding risk, but also coding impact. So it's ongoing work, admittedly, but I think we're getting better at it. And you're absolutely right. This has to be connected also directly to the cure, to the solutions. How many lives can we save? How many jobs can we create if we move in a new direction? And what one has to finally admit in this whole story, which you're also kind of putting your finger on, is that it's not a seamless transition. It's not, even if we have so much evidence today of scalable solutions that makes us winners in the other end, it is indeed a major transformation, a gauntlet to go from where we are today, many times petrol-dependent economies, into energy-independent, green, sustainable and healthy economies. And that is where the leadership comes in, I believe. So it's just to say that you're putting your finger on a lot of the high priority research work, and we need close collaboration with great scientists around the world to succeed in this. And of course, that's something we look forward to continue working also with Canadian colleagues.
Thank you so much. Yes, so we have one MP. Elizabeth May, thank you so much. You're saving me today. You are ready to hear your question. Go ahead.
Oui, mais désolé parce que c'est pas possible pour moi de participer en personne aujourd'hui. I had thought I could be there in person because I am so sad. Courtney Howard, whom I adore, and Catherine McKenna. There's so many people in the room I want to be with, and pardonnez-moi, c'est seulement le problème avec l'horaire impossible pour les députés. Ce matin, I had thought this meeting was in the Wellington building. I thought, easy peasy, I can be there in person, yay. But then I read more carefully, one Wellington, I can't possibly pull that off. So Catherine understands this kind of dilemma as an MP. I just only put my hand up. It's not such a question. It's just to say, there are a lot of members of Parliament who co-sponsored today's event. I know from other colleagues they weren't able to come for good reason, unfortunately, just because of our calendars. I wanted to let you know, and again, to everybody who's participating, and to Nicole and Victoria and dear colleague and friend, Rosa Galvez, to everyone in the room, there are more MPs who would have been there if we could have done. And to Dr. Rockström, your presentation on planetary boundaries and systemic risk, I'd already booked myself to speak in the foyer at the microphone right before question period. I'm now going to be speaking in the foyer at the microphone right before question period, wondering, do any of our national media know what AMOC stands for and what the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulatory System, being at no longer at low risk of collapse, what this means. So I will be speaking to this, hoping to increase media attention in the fact that this roundtable happened today. We need to do it again and again and again. And Dr. Rockström, my sad question to you is only, how does one cling to hope that the Prime Minister understands climate science, given every action of this government since they took power? Merci. Okay. Désolé.
Yeah, tough question. Dr. Rockström, you want to try to answer? I cannot even start to answer that question. You want to try? No?
Well, I can just, to begin with, thank you so much, Elizabeth, and I'm happy also to send over more scientific evidence of any kind that is the foundation for the risks regarding the AMOC. When it comes to the leadership in Canada, things are relative, of course. I unfortunately conclude that we don't have credible climate leadership essentially in any government in the world today. That is one of these very big concerns we're facing. But when I look back at your Prime Minister's track record, I think that is quite a significant track record. So I think fundamentally, I think there is a lot of insight there. Of course, that collides clearly with the realities of the Canadian political landscape that I do not know enough on. But I still think that there is fundamental knowledge there, which I think should be surfaced, and that pressure should be put on the leadership in Canada in that regard.
Thank you. We have a question. He's been waiting just a second. Daniel.
Oui. Bonjour, Daniel Breton. I am a former Environment Minister of Quebec, and I am now the President and CEO of Electric Mobility Canada, which is a Canadian EV Industry Association. And last night we saw the price of gas would go down, 10 cents less gas tax. So I calculated last night, and it's going to end up costing the average Canadian maybe a bit less than the price of a coffee at Tim Hortons. But the messaging is important. So, I mean, I've been doing interviews. I mean, I did one this morning right in front of the Senate saying, you know, that if we were to go to an electric vehicle, you would save 10 times that amount. But there is so much pressure. I mean, when I was young, when I went to university 45 years ago, the price of gas went up because of Iran-Iraq war. And people were waiting in line for the gas price to go down, and I've been going through many crises ever since. So on a daily basis, the average Canadian or the average American, when they vote, oftentimes they vote because of the price of gas. So how do we deal with this situation? I think that Catherine McKenna was absolutely right when she said, well, two things. Canada is a petro state. And the second thing is, how do we get to ordinary people saying how this can help their quality of life? Because right now, people look at short-term impacts of the price of gas on their livelihood. And frankly, and I was saying that to Rosa earlier today, they don't care that much these days about the environment like they did 3 years ago. So that, to me, that's a really tough question. I've been dealing with this for decades, but I want to hear you because I think our messaging is too, I would say, disconnected from daily realities.
Yeah, I agree with that. But yes, you want to start the answer? Okay.
Thanks for that question. As chair of the Global Climate and Health Alliance, I'm lucky to work with one of the world's top communications researchers named Ed Maybach. And so all of the work he's done has actually shown that messages around health and well-being land the most across most countries, across most audience segments. And the most particularly effective type of message is when you take a message that talks about, you know, the health impacts of climate change, say on health and health systems, wildfire smoke increases asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, heart attacks, and say, okay, we want to decrease the drivers of climate change. We will do that by adopting electric vehicles that will decrease fossil fuel-based pollution, and what that does is it decreases the chronic diseases that kill the most Canadians, decreases cancer, decreases chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, decreases cardiovascular disease and stroke. Those messages attached to a specific policy initiative land everywhere, and I'm happy to, I'll just quickly introduce some of the, put up your hand if you're a doctor or a nurse in the room. We have lots of physicians in the room. I'm a proud past president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, and I want to thank you all for your support. I want you to also know pretty much everybody here is here for free. Okay? That's how much these health practitioners care. I'm here for free. I flew my way here. Okay? And there's a beauty in that. However, it's also difficult to scale. So we need to change the way we support this work. And that's because, essentially, if you want evidence-based, values-driven lobbyists, we need to figure out what that structure is, because we're losing to the people who are getting paid to do the work. And, you know, we can all do what we can, but it results in, I've burned out. I know others of us in the room have burned out. We need to make sure that this work is supported structurally at the scale we need it to create the change we need. And that goes from research to policy to advocacy to political work. Thank you.
I just wanted to say something about salience. One of my background is in behavior and psychology and sociology and anthropology. And we live complicated lives. And what is salient is what will take our attention. We're in an attention economy, we say, an attention world. We have a dearth of leaders who can talk confidently about these issues, that understand the science, and that are therefore able to make these connective messaging. And so I believe that upskilling anyone, and we can't just rely on government, but if we look at government, if we look at the media, if you were to sit and watch news for a week, you wouldn't think that any of this mattered. You just wouldn't, right? So who then in their local community, who kind of has read some stuff and thinks maybe they're a bit concerned, has the ability to then stand up and to lead? And to lead means envisage a future that doesn't yet exist so well that you take other people with you. That means you've got to say the unusual thing, be the unusual thing, do the unusual thing. And you won't do that unless you feel you're part of a norm of something bigger, which is where the salience really comes in. But you can't unify around nothing. And that's what I feel we've really been lacking, is the clarity about what we're leading for that's shared and that can work. And so I loop back round to what I was talking about the governance standard in purpose governance, because that we can teach at primary school. Citizens need to know that to govern governments. Governments need to know it to govern companies and organizations and the country as a whole. And we need it for ourselves to govern ourselves, to be purpose-driven. So let's organize to create, to galvanize the voices that are in the system around something clear that we can lead for, that is united, and that we don't need to have done 5 PhDs in order to be able to make real. Then I think we can create some salience in the system and unite the energy.
Yeah, sure. Having worked in climate change for a number of years in North Dakota, got good practice at dealing with different kinds of folks in the environment. And what I realized very clearly there was how much farmers cared about their land because of their business, their livelihoods were there. And when they talked about it, I often listened to them, because oftentimes we don't like to engage with people that don't agree with us, but that's not how we get things done in the world. So as I listened to them and talked about, having these conversations about how much they do care for their land, trying to find the person, bringing the human to human experiences back. And this is why what you said is so critical, because we're not doing a good job of that in science. We're not doing a good job of that in policy. And that's why it breeds mistrust in science, because we've created this false hierarchy where there's people that know everything and people that don't. And that's created the divide that we've had it, and it's increasing the divide that we had, and we're losing that humanity part. It's easy to blame fuel when we don't have humanity as a part of that. And I think that's why simple messaging, and it's not about messaging, it's about connection. It's about how do we actually reconnect with people that we don't agree with, that may not necessarily carry the same values as us because they're humans, and bringing that human aspect to the conversation is what we're lacking. We're seeing it in our kids with the levels of anxiety, the levels of depression, all of these things. Our society is not on a good track because we're losing that connection piece. So I, again, bring it back to the simplicity. Yes, we can do all of these things, but if we don't have the humanity and bring that back and embody that in our engagements and our conversations, nobody's going to listen to us because they don't believe what we're saying as being real.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for everything. I know that our dear Dr. Johan Rockström has to go because he has an incredible busy agenda that we saw at the beginning of the day. But thank you so much. And you leave when you have to leave. We have 2 more questions. So Jenny and Richard.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Senator Rosa Galvez, for organizing this beautiful panel. I think it's just a great opportunity. And I was so happy to see also that Johan Rockström accepted to share his knowledge with all the nice people and the senators also who are here in the room. Thank you so much for taking the time. And also, I think, I'm the president of the International Observatory on Nature's Rights. And we have a huge network of researchers doing the same work we are doing in Canada, so advancing nature's rights. And they do an important link between planetary boundaries and nature's rights, because planetary boundaries are giving us the suggestions coming from science. But nature's right is trying to translate those boundaries into law frameworks in order to make accountable those to push the humanity to trespass those boundaries. So I would like to know if you have seen that, heard about that connection. These are important articulation between planetary boundaries and nature's rights. And also for the women who are here in the panel, I have heard also concerning the recognition of the caribou herd in Northwestern Territories as an ecological person, the Yukon River as a legal person, and we were supporting also the recognition of the Magpie River as a legal person and with rights, and also the St. Lawrence River legal personhood with rights that have been recognized by 11 indigenous nations in Canada. So I would like to have your input on these ideas. Thank you so much.
A last intervention, Professor Rockström, on that?
Yes, thanks. No, it's really putting a finger on something that I believe to be not only really important, but something that we're seeing a momentum, just as you summarize. And we see it in New Zealand as well, with providing legal rights for a river basin. And I think that what we see in the entire litigation area in the world, which is rising exponentially, is a reflection of how law is being brought closer into defending nature-based human rights. And what happened last year with the International Court of Justice and the advisor opinion was, in my view, nothing less than a breakthrough in support of everything that you are articulating, admittedly still zooming in on climate, but I think it will spill over also to the fundamental role of the biosphere for stability of life support. And this is not abstract. This is right as we speak, and it's concrete and it's real, and it can be measured, particularly when it comes to air quality and fresh water supply and fundamental food security and soil health. I mean, everything that we've been talking about here, attributes that people value and love and depend on. So I think this is a trajectory, and we'll see more of it for sure.
Thank you. So one last question, Richard, and then we will give the floor for concluding remarks.
Okay. Thank you. I'm Richard Vanderjagt, a hematologist oncologist, now retired from the Ottawa Hospital, was there for 28 years. But I've spent decades studying the links between environment and health. I'm also on the steering committee for Planetary Health and a Wellbeing Society, along with Courtney and Trevor and many others. And actually, one of the things that really strikes me is we still haven't adopted the correct language. We still talk about net zero when we really should be talking about near zero emissions. And the whole bit about net zero, we wrote an article about in the Hill Times a couple of years ago. That is a misnomer. People don't understand it because it all depends on where you set your baseline. What net zero really means, we should be talking about near zero as emission standards. The next thing is Bill McKibben writes in his book, Here Comes the Sun, on how renewable energy actually creates more jobs than is lost by transitioning from fossil fuel industry to renewable energy. And we need to get that home through to the current government, because none of the mandate letters, as far as I understand it, to any of the ministers that are currently in government contains any information to tell them you should be addressing climate change. And that has to be changed. and we should be telling them to adopt the Climate Aligned Finance Act. And the war has really illustrated how, the current war, has really illustrated how interdependent we are on fossil fuels. If we were a renewable-based society with a national microgrid that was based on renewable energy, which we've also written about in the Hill Times, we wouldn't be worried about something like that. We wouldn't be worried about something like that. If we had a national microgrid, again, I've written about that in the Hill Times, you can find that article, but you will see what it does for the economy, but it will make us, it shows how independent we would be of any of these sort of global phenomenon, regardless of who's in the White House or what else is going on.
Thank you so much. I can answer the question about Monday letters, which doesn't exist anymore. It was initiative of Premier Trudeau. He was very strong on Monday letters, but they don't have any more Monday letters. And we've been asking for Monday letters. Okay, before I give the floor to my colleague, Senator Pupatello, I would like to thank the panelists, you guys for coming, my staff who make this possible, Diego, Sylvie, Cheryl, Daniela, and as I think it's very clear, we need, and to our sponsors, their names are there, it is very clear that it cannot be just an isolated, once-in-a-while discussion. This has to be all the time, recurrent, frequent, and so we, start putting inside the heads of decision makers the relationship that there is between nature and our economy and our well-being. There was a question about how we send the message, and I know that when I go to other places and they ask me about this question, how do you make the link between protecting environment and nature? I will say this. I am from Quebec, and the GDP of Quebec is based 90% on nature. If we have hydroelectricity, it's because we have mighty rivers giving us ecological services. If we have an industry of the maple, which we have 100% of the industry of the maple, and not only maple syrup, but a lot of products, and it brings us $4 billion per year, it's because we have maple trees. If there is a plague that comes and destroys this tree, forget that industry is gone forever. And also because our soils and agriculture is good because we have biodiversity. So our whole economy in Quebec is based on nature. So let's stop pretending that nature doesn't have any role to play in our economy, because it does. And the same thing for Alberta. If Alberta doesn't have all these deposits of oil sands, well, then there is no economy for them based on the oil sand, which is a natural resource. And if we just exported it raw at, during the COVID period, $24 the barrel, it goes to America and it gets refined, and then it gets sent over to us as jet fuel at $300 the barrel. So there is many things, many links that we don't say because we don't want to say uncomfortable things. And this industry receives a lot of subsidies. And if the subsidies will go to a different purpose, showing us where we have to go, it will be much better. So I think that is the time to say what is uncomfortable and just repeat the message and extend the message. Diego has, we have recorded this event. It's going to be in YouTube, it's going to be in link, and I invite you to post it as much as you can so like everybody knows more about this. So, Senator Pupatello.
Good morning, everyone, and I am delighted to be here. If I ever met an individual that would be described as a climate, it would be Senator Galvez. So I have to say, you are your own climate. And as a very new member, I'm actually number 105 in the Senate. I'm the last appointed senator, very new. I came to watch Senator Galvez at work, and it didn't take very long to note that if she calls you, just do what she says right at the front end and save yourself a lot of trouble. Because I think you've been very, very impactful in your role as a senator. Despite MPs not being in the room, some certainly watching and some certainly learning after today what you've managed to achieve. In summary, I wanted to start just a very brief comment that Dr. Rockström, who was speaking earlier, he said something very interesting to me that seemed to flow through the balance of all the good doctors' commentary the rest of the day, and that is that documentation of evidence on the economy seems to be that one thing that has to bring these circles together. And I often participate in listening when I say environmentalists organize events, and then I like to listen in, and then I go over here and I listen to the businesses talking about their version of environmental events, and that's happening over here. What I know is, having been in both, there is at least half of the circle that intersects, but it's never in the same room at the same time. And when we're documenting our impacts on the economy, the people that are really influenced by the so-called goals, which are money, assets, capital, they have a vested interest in us getting this right. Insurance companies, the automotive firms who've invested billions in their EV strategy, assets right now that are almost stranded because we're not buying them. And this is a serious issue for the economy. So I think it's important that we have good information, and more science it's evidence-based. You can't say that it isn't. Maybe 20 years ago, but we've really gotten better because I think this circle told this circle, where's the science? Well, the science is coming, and it's here. So I do think that it is time that we get these circles together so the conversation happens at the same time, even when it's really uncomfortable for both sides, because people in this room will not like to hear what I have heard business people say. How many thousands are you going to put out on the street because they're going to lose their jobs, so that they can hear about how many more employees can be found because you've really enlarged the solar industry. I was part of a government that enacted the Green Energy Act. Very difficult at the time. Lots of naysayers. We did create a lot of jobs, but what was required, in my view, is the view of a seventh generation thinking, not a couple terms of government. Because a couple of terms later, we've got a whole different view of what the government is going to promote. And then it's gone. And so you really have to have everyone in the room understanding that you do set the goals together, because one group setting goals will not be the goals of the other circle. And we've got to do that in the same place. But I do believe there's an interest. Like I said, insurance companies, obvious impact. The tourist industry, obvious impact. And those leaders are smart. So in my view, that really is next steps that talks about how you document impact on the economy. They need to be the leaders in this room as well. And I think that that's how we do move forward. I just want to congratulate everyone, the few that I did get to meet in the audience that have made a career out of this, and we appreciate it. And the people that don't know about your work, they'll come to know, and they're going to appreciate you too. So thanks especially to Senator Galvez. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So with that, we conclude our formal part of the event. You are invited to have lunch in an informal way and keep the conversation going. Thank you so much to everybody. And yes, let's try to say and we see each other again next year. Thank you. Okay. Merci beaucoup.
C'était votre objectif.